All righty. All right, we'll move forward with our next panel discussion. So across the country, efforts to police language about Palestine and other critical histories are chilling honest instruction. This panel brings together educators and advocates who are protecting academic freedom and students' right to a complete education. So please welcome co-editor of Teach Palestine, Dr. Samia Shoman, National Education Association Delegate Aida Salah, Associate Director at Global Educational Excellence, Dr. Marwan Isa, renowned journalist and best-selling author, Sim Kern, and the moderator will be ADC's National Education Director, Colette Kavanaugh.
All right, hi everyone. I'm gonna dive right in because we have so little time. Like they said, I'm Colette Kavanaugh. I am the National Director of Education for ADC, specifically for K through 12 education. So just before we get started with the questions, can I just have like a round of hands? Raise your hand if you did at least part of your K through 12 education in the US. Okay, so that's the vast majority of people. Raise your hand if you have a child or have a child in your life in some capacity who is currently enrolled in the K through 12 system in the US. All right, yeah. So this is something that really impacts us all, even if you are not one of the people who raised your hands. What our kids know and how they're learning is going to impact us all, especially in the US when you have such far reach, especially with our military presence all over the world and our foreign policy. What children know about the world impacts that. And what I want to give you is some statistics. The Education Data Initiative in 2025 reported that 91.4% of Americans aged 25 or older have obtained at least a high school diploma. And only 38.3% have obtained a college diploma. So the vast majority of Americans only have a high school education. So the education that they're getting from K through 12 is extremely important in shaping their worldview. And so we want to talk today about that a little bit more. So kicking this off, I want to talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing in K through 12 education today. So what we've noticed in the work that we've been doing here at ADC is that there is definitely a lot of curriculum that is severely lacking in content about Arabs and Muslims, and specifically about Palestine and Palestinians. For those of you who don't know, the curriculum in each state in the US is different. So right now, we have people up here from California, Texas, Michigan. I did used to teach in New York for a while when I was formerly a teacher, but I just want to go down, and if you could each tell me about generally what's taught about Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians in schools in your state, what's sort of mandated. I know that you're at a charter school, so if you want to talk about that specifically and the differences there, and how that impacts your students.
So with charter schools, which are just like public schools, we still all have to follow the Common Core standards. And with the Common Core standards, there's world history. And usually when they're talking about world history, it's either China or Europe. No one else really exists. So just when you're looking at the standards and things like that, there's no place or there's no room for a lot of education related to Palestine or other subjects like that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, Samia.
So, yeah, I'm in California. I've been a public educator for 25 years. Similarly, in world history or contemporary world studies, there are actually standards where you can bring in the Arab world and Palestine in terms of post-World War I and World War II development and changes. That's where I taught my unit on understanding Palestine and Israel through multiple narratives. perspective, although a lot of teachers don't want to choose to teach it because, they say it's complicated and it's hard and they're afraid of the attacks. And I think while things have changed, I know growing up in California and my own experience, a lot of what's taught about the Arab world was very negative. I grew up and went to high school through the Gulf War, and then of course there was 9/11. Having been in the classroom for 16 years and teaching other Arab students, I know that, they didn't, unless maybe they were in my class or somebody else was willing to teach it, they kind of went through their K-12 experience really not learning anything positive. And it's fascinating because at the high school I taught at, the JCRC came after me for teaching about, Palestine for many, many years. And now my own children are actually just started at that high school, so I'm watching like a hawk.
I'm also in California, so I have pretty much the same thing to say as Samia. I will add that typically teachers might have 1 to 2 days to teach that unit on the creation of Israel and Palestine, and it's not enough time. And there can be inclusion of Arab Americans in the ethnic studies courses, but that completely varies by district, by school, by teacher. And there are efforts to keep Arab Americans out of ethnic studies as well. So there's not a lot. There is some 9/11 talk in US history in 11th grade, but in we'll talk about this, some of the textbooks we've seen not a lot of mention of Arab Americans, but also we're much more than just what happened, to us after 9/11 and the discrimination. We have a lot more presence in this country that could be talked about and contributions, but are not. There's also a unit on Islam in 7th grade, world history, that I've heard of some teachers skipping because of complaints from parents, so.
And Sim?
And I'm in Texas, where kids take 3 full years of Texas history in elementary, middle, and high school, which is, of course, a very glorifying colonial course full of misinformation. They don't get any world history until sophomore year of high school. So I mostly I taught for 10 years middle and high school, and I would have students didn't know any countries outside, didn't know if Philadelphia was a different country or a city. Just the lack of knowledge about the world outside of Texas is extremely minimal. The knowledge of the Arab world, Arab geography, and history is non-existent, except for, of course, we have large, robust Arab communities in Texas. And yeah, I have a college student as well who she recently went through that world history course sophomore year and was fighting with her teachers about the creation of the state of Israel and was the lone voice in the class kind of offering a factual perspective on what really happened, and was called an anti-Semite by her. She was told her views were anti-Semitic, and she was the only Jewish student in the school. So, so that's the situation in Texas, unsurprisingly.
Yeah. Fun times. In New York, it's similar to in California in that you have world history in 7th and 10th grade, and that's it, and extremely little time is devoted to Arab history, Muslim history, and especially history of Palestine. And the result is that we're having students who are coming out of the school system with no concept of who Arabs are, who Muslims are, who Palestinians are, what those narratives are. When they graduate from high school, most of them are 18, they're at voting age, they can register to vote. And their knowledge of a significant portion of the world that the US has an incredibly large role in is nil. So one of the things the more kids know, I want to stress, the more tomorrow's adults will know. So K through 12 has the education, especially since that's the education that the majority of people in the US have today. It can lead to a better informed electorate people who are more likely to support and advocate for human rights of Arabs and Palestinians, both inside and outside of the US. So we need to not forget K through 12. I also wanted to go to a point, Sim, that you were touching on and that you touched on a bit, Ida, which is just the general ignorance that exists about these subjects. So people aren't learning about these subjects in high school. And one of the things that I've done along with Ida and in collaboration with other groups in San Diego, including the Majdal Center, which is an Arab American cultural center there, is we've designed professional development trainings for teachers and administrators and school counselors. And when we first went into those spaces, we asked them what they wanted to know and what they felt they needed more information on. We initially wanted to just focus on Palestine. And the first question that one of the administrators asked was, who are Arabs? And it was sort of a little bit of a, whoa, okay, we really need to go back to page 1 of the book. We did a survey when we first started our first PD, and we gave all of the participants a map of the world, and we said, color in all of the countries that you think are Arab, sort of general geographic area. We got stuff in Far East Asia, we got stuff in South America, we got stuff in Europe. I mean, it was just sort of, yeah. I mean, I know that American sense of geography is not top, and that's something we also need to work on. We asked about prior knowledge of Arabs, there was near nothing. Terrorism and oppression of women came up a lot. So we're bombarded by all of these sources of information and all these prejudiced stereotypes and Orientalist stereotypes in the world around us, in the media around us, and that's all a lot of people have. I think we get used to, in these spaces where we all have sort of similar prior knowledge, I can mention an event or a video that I've seen of what's happened in the past 2 years, and you'll all probably be familiar with what I'm talking about, but that's not the case for a lot of the population. And so I just want to talk, Ida, if you could speak a little bit to some of the kind of wake-up calls that we've had about what teachers know and don't know. And then Sim, also, I'll pass it on to you next to talk a little bit more about your experience with the limited information that a lot of people have right now. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
So a lot of our teachers, they don't know the community they're teaching. And, you know, the majority of teachers in this country are white. And even if, we don't even know the Arab American population of teachers because we're not on the form to even fill, but we know that the majority are white, and we know that a lot of people, you know, maybe don't go outside of their group, and, you know, maybe they never met an Arab. There's plenty of teachers I've been around that I'm the first Arab that they have a relationship with. And so we were seeing that they do not know. If you are a world history teacher, you're teaching everything from decades and decades. I've had 2 world history teachers ask me if Persians are Arabs. So they really don't know. There was a lot of not understanding kind of the diversity within our religions as well, not realizing not all Muslims are Arab, not all Arabs are Muslim. Not understanding world events that have impacted their students and their communities. Not understanding the fear of surveillance within the community, not understanding the impact that the current genocide is having on their students. I think a wake-up call for some of the teachers is realizing that they have students who have family in Gaza, and it's shocking to them to realize, like, I have a student whose family was just bombed in Gaza. I never thought that this would be a student of mine. And so I think that's important for our teachers to understand that these are your students. So yeah, they also not really knowing much about, you know, culturally and, you know, stuff about the community. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, you know, the role of women in our community and how we feel about education and all that. So yeah, they had a lot to learn. It's great when they're willing, but remember, these are voluntary trainings, so we really need to get more of our teachers and counselors to want to be in these trainings. I'm trying to think, was there anything else big that we noticed in our trainings that I left off?
There's a lot, but I'll come back to some of it later. Yeah. Yeah, it's been an educational experience. Yeah. And Sim, how about you now make educational videos that have gone viral and been amazing and given people so much more perspective and knowledge about Palestine specifically and about Zionism and anti-Zionism. What have you found in general in communicating those messages in terms of people's prior knowledge of all of these subjects?
I think, like speaking for me and my community, I think probably, the thing I try to do with the book, Genocide Bad, and with my content mostly these days, one of my main goals is to address the way Jews are teaching our own history and the conflation of Israeli propaganda with Jewish history and the concept of Judaism as a whole. Even many Jews in the United States are incredibly ignorant about our history in Europe because Zionists like to glorify a ancient biblical history in Palestine that we actually don't have a lot of archaeological evidence for these things that happen. We have no archaeological evidence for a lot of things that happened in the Torah, like the Exodus, like slavery in Egypt, like the Exodus, and like any kind of mass migration out of Palestine into Europe. There's no archaeological record that European Jews actually came from Palestine. What we do have is millennia of history within Europe, but the Zionist narrative skips from the ancient Jews in Palestine to the Holocaust. And we're completely severed from our deep cultural ties to Europe, the continent that we're actually from. And so US Jews are incredible, even people who've been in the Jewish community all their lives, who are Jewish educators, are incredibly ignorant about basics of our own history in Europe because that doesn't serve a Zionist narrative. So that history has been silenced. We're ignorant of the many celebrated Jewish authors who were anti-Zionists in the late 19th and early 20th century, people like Karl Kraus and Lucian Wolff. These should be really well-known, celebrated Jewish authors. They were in their time, but because they don't serve Zionist narrative, they were always fiercely anti-Zionist artists and culture workers. They've been dropped from the canon of Jewish literature. They've been dropped into obscurity because the people funding Jewish cultural institutions are all Zionists, and the money's all coming from Israel. And so I can understand how so many educators, right? I mean, probably the vast majority of US K-12 history teachers just conflate Zionism with Judaism completely. And so not only are they neglecting to teach the factually true narrative of the creation of Israel, but things happen, like my kindergarten daughter, they do in Texas, for the entire month of December, the elementary school curriculum is Christmas. Every day they're bringing home Christmas-themed homework. And I talked to the school about, like, listen, we're Jewish, maybe we could incorporate other holiday traditions from around the world. And the principal said, yes, okay, we'll do that. And then they sent my daughter home. In the kindergarten, they send them home with like headband crowns sometime. They send my kindergarten daughter home with a Star of David in the middle of her forehead. And it says, children in Israel celebrate Hanukkah. And she's like colored this in and they put it on her head. And I was furious, right? But the principal, I know she was trying, bless her heart, but they just don't, there's just this immense lack of knowledge about the fact that Zionism and Judaism are not identical, Israel is not a stand-in for Jewishness, and that there's a much longer history of anti-Zionism for as long as there have been Zionists. Yeah, these are all things that in my content we're trying to educate people on.
Yeah, and just to speak to teachers in general, I think we're all educators up here, tremendous respect for teachers. I think it's important for people also to know that people who train to be history teachers in the public school system, I can speak for California at the very least, they don't have to have any specific training in history whatsoever. They will take one exam, which is I think between 4 to 6 hours, I don't remember exactly how long, multiple choice with some essays on a range of different history topics. If they get a pass on that exam, they are qualified, and also go through a teaching credentialing program. They are then qualified to teach any of the social sciences. So you have a lot of teachers who are going in, some who are very passionate, like I'm sure everyone up here, is and was when they were teaching, who do a lot of extra resource, who are always looking for supplemental sources, who want to bring in more to the classroom. But you also have a lot of teachers who are overwhelmed, overworked, underpaid, who are teaching way too many different classes, who are looking at the textbook the day before, sometimes, especially if it's their first year teaching, reading what's there, and that's what they're going on for what they know about the history. And oftentimes those textbooks are incredibly biased and prejudiced, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit more later. What I wanna talk on now, also, by the way, I'm gonna do a plug, I brought props. If you guys haven't read Genocide Bad, which is Sim Kern's book, you have, yes. Interlink Publishers is here. They are in the Vizuk. Go over there, get a copy. This book is absolutely brilliant, and it's such a great read. It blew me away, and there's so much really essential information in there that will really help you, and stuff that I really hadn't heard of before that blew my mind. And I also want to make a plug for Rethinking Schools is an amazing organization, and they published a guide on teaching Palestine. Samia was one of the editors. And actually that brings me to my next point. I wanted to read a quote from the intro of this particular issue of Rethinking Schools. And it says, the K through 12 curriculum across the United States teaches children what is important, what knowledge matters, and crucially, whose lives matter. But silence is also a part of the curriculum. What is missing from schools tells young people what not to consider, what not to question, and whose lives do not count. Palestine has long been one of the great silences in the official curriculum. So I wondered, Samia, if you could speak a bit to that, a little bit more, why Palestine has been so absent. You sort of started to touch on some of the censorship, and then also the work you've done with Teach Palestine.
Sure. I think, I think most people know the incredible influence educators have on young people's lives. They either bring joy and create curiosity and make them love school, or they can diminish and really put that fire out. And a lot of that is tied to whether educators and education leaders see children in their full humanity. And when you try to repress the teaching of Palestine or tell a child when they're in 2nd or 3rd grade, find your country, put on the map, no, what do you mean? There's no Palestine. You can easily diminish that light and silence that identity. I know, because I grew up at home in all my full Palestinianness and loved it, and as soon as I walked out the door to go to school, I tried to shed that. I tried to change my name for years. And I didn't know how to reconcile being American and Arab, hence I love the kind of tagline of the truly Arab, fully American. I couldn't do that. And now I'm raising, Allah blessed me with twins, Jihad in Palestine, a son and a daughter. And I remember my mom, she's still till this day, trying to get me to change my kids' names before they started school. And then after October 7th, FaceTiming my daughter, telling her to find a nickname to go by. And she had nothing for him, even though, and so I think about the way they've navigated their education, and teachers that have allowed them. You don't have to stand up and say, today we're going to learn about Palestine. You can say, today we're going to talk about 3rd grade, where our names came from. And then having my daughter be able to share that. Let's talk about, what does it mean, what does home mean, especially when you're from a diasporic community like many Arabs are. And so I think there are ways, right, that you work to bring Palestine into classrooms. And the repression, right, against it. And that's in full effect in California with Senate Bill 1277 that was already passed, and now AB 715, which is on the governor's desk, which doesn't in words say you can't teach about Palestine, but the laws are around kind of pushing genocide and Holocaust education, and then making sure that in that education, where it's the don't teach about Palestine is and we're gonna create a position to make sure no one is being anti-Semitic in schools. using the IHRA definition, which says criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, which in sense tries to kind of silence and repress.
Yeah, and this is actually something I'm just going to cut in quickly that I want people to be aware of if you're not already. So the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that she just mentioned, look in your school districts and see if they've adopted this definition, because it explicitly states that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic and counts as anti-Semitism. And what they're trying to do with AB 715 is enshrine that into law and create this position of an anti-Semitism coordinator. And one of the things that's terrifying about it as well is that it allows for anyone, they don't have to be part of the school or the school district, they don't have to be a parent or student, can report a teacher that they suspect of anti-Semitism. And to give a personal example, I used to work at a private school. Some of the teachers found out that I have family in Palestine and that I'd spent a while in Palestine. I happened to be in Ramallah in the West Bank. I was called into a meeting, and the head of the high school, first question was, did you live in Gaza? And I just sort of innocently was like, no, I was in the West Bank. I was working with my uncle for a bit. He said, well, some of the parents have become aware of this, and they want you fired. They want to do an investigation of your teaching practices to make sure that you're not pushing a pro-Palestinian agenda on the students. The investigation took place. They found nothing that they could fire me for, but I was told not to mention Palestine in any capacity outside of a course that I was teaching. And I was consistently told to watch my back. I had one conversation with an administrator during the first year of the genocide when I was teaching about water scarcity in Uruguay and South Africa for a geography lesson. And the conversation was that I needed to watch my back and be careful because parents might think I was trying to draw parallels to water scarcity in Palestine and the intentional blocking of water by Israel to Palestinians. And so that whole experience was very jarring for me. It was very hard to go through all of that and to feel that I had no support from the teachers around me. And it also really frightened a lot of the other educators around me to talk about these subjects. And that's part of the goal of this. It's going to shut down conversation. And it's also an extremely expensive bill to pass, so it's going to take a lot of important education money away from other places where it could be used. So if anybody's from California, call Governor Newsom and tell him not to sign the bill. It's on his desk as we speak. But I want to also talk to something that you said, sort of pivot a bit, about having these culturally responsive environments, and I want to go to you, Marwan, next. But researchers at Harvard University's Adolescent Ethnic Racial Identity Development Lab did a study. Ida actually first drew my attention to this to give credit where credit is due. And they found significant evidence that when adolescents are given the opportunity to explore and express their ethnic racial identity, it positively impacts their psychological well-being, their academic performance, and their peer relationships. The opposite is then also true. If you tell a child to hide part of their cultural identity and tell them that they can't fully explore it, tell them that it's controversial in some way, which is one of the biggest complaints that we're getting from students, you see a negative impact on their psychological well-being. You see a negative impact on their academic performance. Their cognitive function takes a hit. Their ability to complete work in a timely manner can take a hit. And it also has a negative impact on their peer relationships. So we are really hurting our students when we tell them to suppress part of their identities. And Samia, you mentioned your kids' names, and names are a really big deal. My name's Colette. My parents gave me a white name. My brother, they wanted to name after my great-grandfather. They wanted to name him Halim. They named him Hal because they thought he would get less bullied if they had this name. The fact that our children have to do mental gymnastics when someone asks them where they're from or what their name is and sort of judge the safety of the situation and whether or not it'll be accepted is something that's taking a toll on them. They don't feel safe in their classrooms. They don't know who's a safe person to talk to. So I do want to pivot. You've worked a lot, Marwan, with creating culturally responsive environments, and you're in an area where there are a large number of Arab students. So what have you done to try to create those culturally responsive
So we're kind of lucky in our organization that a lot of these problems don't exist. We don't have to hide that we're Palestinian. We don't, none of these issues of like cultural identity. And the reason that's the case is because we have over 5,000 students and through over 15 campuses that are all mostly from the Middle Eastern or South Asia that appreciate and understand different cultures. So yes, I hear a lot of these stories and a lot of the things that happen. And one of the reasons we started these charter schools was specifically for that reason, because growing up as in Michigan, it was tough, being Middle Eastern, and if you spoke a second language, you had to go through ESL and all that fun stuff. But because we set up these schools, these kids in our schools were lucky. They had the opportunity to be proud of their identity. So instead of having a curriculum specifically about Palestine or a course about Palestine, our kids were lucky because it was just part of the environment. It wasn't like, oh, we have to really focus. If I came to them and said, oh, we need to talk about Palestine this month on this subject, a lot of the kids would look at me like, why? We already do this. Like, this is part of our identity. And that really has helped where many of the kids didn't really get to deal with these traumas. And I think that's why a lot of these families chose these schools and these environments, because these charter schools are really grassroots driven. And it's really about the parents. So if there's a group of parents, whether they're in California, whether they're in New York, they're like, hey, we want to have our kids in a more environment that appreciates our identity, appreciates our culture, doesn't shame away from being Arab. That allowed that to happen. Where a lot of the schools, they're like, oh, you got to be Western. You got to, forget that you're Arab side and forget things like that. To the fact that's now affecting our schools in the Middle East, where a lot of our public schools and especially our private schools in the Middle East, they shun away about being Arab, and you're in the Arab country. Like, no, this is where you should be teaching your kids about your identity. So one of the things that we focus on is like, listen, there's huge value in Western society. There's huge value in understanding American, understanding everything. But don't ever be ashamed of where you're from, and be proud of it. And that's really what's ingrained in our kids, whether they're in kindergarten, whether they're seniors. Like, it's funny, I would see these kids and I'm like, you would think they just came to this country, even though they lived here all their lives, and they're very proud. Like, after the attacks that happened recently with Gaza, they didn't stay quiet. They're out. They protested. They went out they had the mayor show up. They had the police chief show up. They demanded to be protected by potential attacks. These are our students. So whether our teachers, who for the most part fits in mainstream teachers, it wasn't dictated by them. Heck, it wasn't even dictated by us. It was dictated by our students. Our students knew what they wanted, and they believed that it was their right. Especially when you go to a public school, you should have equal rights, and they got that.
Are there still any restrictions on what you teach at the charter school? So, like, for example, could you teach the Nakba as you're teaching?
We teach it all through, so we have the Common Core. We follow that strictly because we have to go through the authorizers and stuff like that. Now, that wasn't a battle we chose to decide to take. Should we, like, hey, let's fight the battle of the curriculum, let's change that. That's an honorable fight, but that wasn't our fight at that moment. Our fight at that moment was to make sure the kids knew about it. So instead of having it in the curriculum, they had a weekend where, they would come and they would design it and they would go through the journey. You would come in and there would be different parts of it, and students would talk about different sections of it. And, all the students knew about it. They were proud of it, their identity. But we didn't even stop there. There was the DEPCA group. And every school has the pancake social. We were doing the food social. Like, we don't need to necessarily have to, we were proud, they were proud to be Arabs. And that carried on to our schools. That carried on to the universities. When these kids left our schools, they didn't hide away. They took it to the next level. And that's really the only way to keep moving that on.
Oh, and it's amazing, yeah. I think it's amazing to have a school environment where students feel that. I personally didn't feel that, and I think we can share stories.
No, I didn't as a child either.
Yeah, as a child. So I was in high school during 9/11. I was called a terrorist at school, as was my brother. People wrote stuff on the walls of our house. My mother lost half of her patients because they said they couldn't trust her anymore. And the thing it's also terrifying that it's still happening today. We do our professional development sessions with one woman who is about 10 years younger, who experienced the same, 15 years younger, who experienced the same discrimination, and we talk to students today who are experiencing the same forms of discrimination. And specifically when it comes to Palestine, this is a really big one. We have, to give an example, I want to talk about the impact on students right now, but when we talk a bit more about that, when we talk about the impact on students, something that's important to remember, if you have, one example I always give at our trainings is if there is the death of a member of your family, you will usually tell the teacher. You'll say, grandma died, you know, my kid's really grieving, they might be a little bit out of it. The teacher's on the lookout for behavioral changes in that student. They want to see what's going on. They might make accommodations in the workload. We have families in San Diego who have lost over 100, near 200 relatives in Gaza. And they're terrified to tell the teachers and the administrators at the school because understandably, not without cause, they're afraid that they will face additional discrimination if they let them know. We talk to students who say, I'm up all night, I'm worried sick about my family, I just want to know if they're okay. We had actually an earthquake during one of our professional development sessions. It was a very mild earthquake in California. Everybody's focus shifted. They needed a minute to get their bearings again. They wanted to text loved ones and see if they were okay. And it actually proved sort of a perfect segue into this, and to say, okay, you were distracted. You couldn't focus. You were worried. You wanted to make sure people were okay. Imagine feeling that way every day for 2 years. I had an experience also, because I want to talk about our Arab American teachers too. I had an experience where my mother lives in Beirut. The bombing was particularly heavy. I was on the phone with her. A bomb fell extremely close to her apartment. I heard the blast, the call dropped. Alhamdulillah, she was okay, but I didn't get through to her for another 30 minutes. I was terrified. I was terrified. I was out of it for the rest of the day. I really wasn't fully functioning. That really took it out of me, even after I knew she was okay. You have students who are experiencing this. They have a lack of focus in the classroom potentially, and teachers don't know why. For young people especially, processing these really heavy emotions, they don't always know how to process them, and they will manifest in other behaviors, which are sometimes considered problematic by the teachers. Now, if teachers are on the lookout for that, and they understand why this is happening, they can help support that student in some way, hopefully. They're a good teacher. But our teachers don't know because our families are afraid to share. And so it's something that we really need to work on, educating the educators and the administrators about all of this. And if we want to talk a bit more, does anybody, I'm just sort of going to open it up. If anyone wants to talk a bit more about student experiences and how this impacts student psyche on a regular basis.
I mean, we know these kinds of events impact students' mental health. I think there's more talk about student mental health in schools these days, and so I think that is an opportunity, and educators don't know what they don't know. So sometimes it's not that they don't want to support students or they don't understand, you know, what's happening. They just don't have the information. So one of the things we've done, and I encourage parents, and that's also where I feel like parents and families, like I love my parents, and they did the best they can, and as someone who works and job is to work with multilingual families, I have a new understanding when I became an administrator of why my parents were the way they were and hesitated to become involved or come to our schools. I am a very different parent, and often, you know, my husband did not grow up here, and so often I have to kind of tell him, like, we've got to be involved, just like our friends are very involved in dictating things and what's happening in the educational system. We must also dictate and ask for what we want for our kids. Schools will listen. So one thing, like, we came up at Teach Palestine with, it's called Understanding Palestine. It's a free downloadable booklet, but one of the pieces in here is literally about how repression affects students and what teachers can do about it and how it affects their mental health. And I think those are ins that we can take with educators that may work. It also has sections on, right, how do you know, is Teaching Palestine anti-Semitic, and resources, knowing your rights, And to your point in the very beginning, right, what is Palestine? Who are Palestinians? So I think it's different times as well because of social media than when I grew up. And so students are finding outlets and kind of feeling more emboldened because there's things that exist now that never existed, whether it's athletes speaking out, artists, singers, and I think for at least my kids, they keep sending me, right, these reels, like, did you see so-and-so made a statement? Did you see this? Did you see that? And they're seeing Arabs in these roles as NBA players, NFL players, singers, writers, poets. There's more books, go to Interlink Books, than ever existed when we grew up. And so I think continuing to support that work is really important.
Yeah. There's not enough time. Sorry. This genuinely could have been a full day conference to talk about all these different issues in K through 12 education, and I apologize for all of the things that we're not going to get to. Hopefully, inshallah, next year we'll be able to do some more panels on this. But I do feel like you're right, and I think that people, through social media, and Sim, this is something that you also mentioned in Genocide Bad, that sort of the veil is beginning to slip a little bit. So the powers that be that are trying to keep this certain, that have I don't know what's going on with this, that have every motivation to keep this certain narrative in place, are beginning to lose a bit of control of the narrative. And if you want to talk a little bit more to that point.
And I think the best way we can support that is to be intersectional in our support of students and recognize that many different communities are being targeted and having to silence themselves in schools, not just Palestinians, right? And we have students who are at the intersection of these things. They may be queer and undocumented and Palestinian. And so on 3 different fronts, they're having to hide parts of themselves and they're being attacked. And so it's really important that we can, all of those of us who are, all peoples that are being like attacked by, the Trump administration, by these forces of imperialism and white supremacy, that we stand together, united for kids. I think something that's been really impactful in terms of addressing these instances when there's been really obvious examples of censorship of Palestinian stories, book events, things, something that as like an anti-Zionist Jewish activist, we prioritize in our JVP chapter is like showing up in presence, being like, we're Jews and we're fine with this. I saw Janan Matari, a Palestinian author, has a book out with Interlink Books, recently had the bookstore, had a Zionist owner canceled, 2 different bookstores canceled her book events. And one of the things you saw was, Jewish anti-Zionist community groups showing up in solidarity with them. And so I think we just all have to sort of have each other's backs for the kids, let them be the full expression of themselves, and reject any attempts at censorship of children's identities and histories and realities. So.
Yeah. And talking, yes. No, I want to echo that. I think it's incredibly important to work in collectives for all of these things. I also want to just quickly say before we turn to, I want to kind of finish off with things that we can do, more concrete things that we can do to combat this. But I wanted to stress again the amount of power that's being thrown at us. So when we talk about AB 715, for example, California is one of the states in the US with the most rights for educators. It's a litmus test for the rest of the country. If they can pass this bill there that's going to censor education about Palestine, there's going to be a push to pass it everywhere. So please be on the lookout for bills like this popping up in your states, and we do need to work together. We really need to collaborate in our efforts to combat all of this. There are a lot of efforts and a lot of money that are against us right now. And I'll just give like one last example. There's something that's called the Institute for Curricular Studies, which I don't know if any of you have heard of. Yeah, Samia has heard. Yeah, Institute for Curricular Studies. It was launched in 2005 to quote, address historical inaccuracies and misinformation about Judaism and Jewish history in public school textbooks. And what they do is they actually pour large amounts of money into lobbying textbook publishers to suppress content about Palestine and Palestinians and push Zionist narratives. And they also fund professional development workshops for teachers and administrators to push that narrative. So we're up against monumental forces, but I do want to say that I think there definitely is hope, especially in working together. So I just want to go down the line, and if any of you could share things that individuals can do, teachers can do, students can do, pick one, pick a few, but just, yeah, give the people hope.
So, like, for us, like, things that could be done is supporting a lot of the schools, and like one of the things that we've seen is that social workers, a lot of them have been able to come in and support the teachers. But ways to help these kids and a way to help even larger is, I was telling you earlier about, like, I'm working on a project right now where we're trying to teach the kids in Gaza. Like, there has to be ways, like, and there's ways to volunteer, whether if you're in the SEL, social emotional learning, or whether you understand science or math, whatever. It's going to take a village to really raise these kids. So anything you could do is great. And the way to really look at this perspective is, like, if you donate money to organizations, that's great. But if you donate your time in these types of groups, and that includes even in the United States, how can we support, creating a club, creating things where people can come and learn about our identities and be proud of, to see what we have, this rich heritage. So those are the type of things I would look at.
I would say operate through courage and not fear. Show up to your kids' schools, even if you don't have kids or they're older. If you own a home that is part of a school district, you have rights to express what you believe should be taught, should be talked to. We have kids and live in these communities too, and should be represented. There's lots of resources and things to support you in doing that. And then get books and donate them to the school, whether it's these or Sims Book. Go to Interlink, their table. Get books for libraries in the schools in your area.
I would say get involved at the local political level with your school board. So the reason why your child's teacher might be scared to talk about Palestine or bring anything in the classroom is because they're scared their principal won't defend them. And your principal is scared that their district office won't defend them. And the superintendent at the head of the district office is scared because the school board has the ability to evaluate, hire, and fire that superintendent. So the school board has a lot of power. So get involved with finding school board members who will support all of our students, most especially our marginalized students, and be proactive, not reactive with your child's teacher. Build that relationship. Bring in little stuff for them. Like, I know parents who just bring in little stuff from Palestine for their child's teacher, and that opens that conversation about who we are, and it helps to stop that dehumanization, because that's a huge part of anti-Palestinian racism, is the dehumanization of us. So build that relationship, but you do have to be involved with the politics of your school.
I would say, even if Governor Newsom signs this law, the more that fascists try to control the education that is happening in classrooms, the more we have to embrace that every interaction we have with another human being is an opportunity for education. And having been a teacher in Texas for 10 years, I found often, as an English teacher, I had far more freedom to teach history than the history teachers did, because their content was carefully subscribed, but I and like art teachers and the music teacher could get away with teaching a lot of, these sort of more factual history topics through teaching the history of art and literature. Now I find just being on TikTok, I'm having a far greater impact as an educator than I ever did in a classroom. So I think that the tighter that they try to control, these official channels of information, the more people are beginning to distrust these institutions and looking elsewhere for answers. And so we have to stay one step ahead of them, be creative. How can we spread education through, again, like cultural groups, like you were saying, Doctor, like, through all our interactions with our community, when you have truth and history and human rights and justice on your side, your message can speak louder even than billions of dollars in propaganda.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to just finish that up. I know our time's up. It's flashing. Students have asked for, Majda Center has done, panels with students. They've asked for safe affinity spaces at schools. If your child is at a school, you can talk to them about potentially setting up a safe affinity space. Collaborate with other Arab, Muslim, Palestinian organizations in your district, in your state, so that you can have each other's back when things come up. Visibility in the curriculum is huge. If there's any teachers out there, there is a dearth of content written at K through 12 level about Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians, more so about Palestinians now, actually, which is amazing. But creating those resources for teachers is really important, and understanding that they have zero prior knowledge. Creating those resources that are in line with the curriculum that they are mandated to teach, so that they're not getting in trouble in that way, but that still get the information in and have information from them to help educate them more. Support from administration and faculty, like Ida was saying, make those connections. When we lead professional workshop sessions for teachers and administrators, I've had people come up to me afterwards and say things that are very problematic but meant in good faith, where they say, I thought you were all terrorists. I thought you all raised your kids to hate. You seem really nice. And everything you said seems non-controversial and okay. And on the one hand, you're going, and on the other hand, it's like, well, you know what? Okay, thank you. I'm glad you got there. Please keep doing the work. Those stereotypes are deeply entrenched. It's going to take you a while, but keep working to unpack those implicit biases. So having that sort of patience with them as well. But definitely working together. We need to get all hands on deck for this. We're up against a mountain of money and power. But like Sim said, I feel like there's, even like with more, the more they crack down, they're holding on, it feels like they're holding on more desperately to power that they know is slipping. And people's eyes are opening to the real history, and that, to the fact that they've been lied to. So hopefully we can overcome these challenges in censorship and education. And thank you all for being here and for being patient with us.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, I will make space for whoever's next. Yeah.
Thank.
Here we go.
Couple.
Yeah.
Sorry, just quick announcements. There will be a shuttle going to Friday prayer at the Islamic Center of America. It's going to be up here in about 10 minutes or so. You can also Uber there if you don't want to wait for the shuttle. There's a program and lunch sponsored by our partners at MPAC, Muslim Public Affairs Council. So if you want to catch that, the shuttle's there. If you want to take an Uber, Islamic Center of America, 19,500 Ford Road. That's the address. Any Uber driver is going to know how to get there. Please be back here at 2 o'clock in the seat. We have we moved part of the program up a little bit, but we got to be back here at 2 o'clock because the next session is also streaming live, and we're on a tight deadline. If you're not going to Friday prayer, there will be lunch served in the suit area. Check out some of the vendors. There's lunch. There's food out there also provided. Check out the facility, the vendors, and hopefully we'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.